Welcome everyone to our Masterclass, Digital Workspace Security Hardening, Lessons from the Field. Today we are joined by Patrick Coble, security nerd, also owner of VDISEC, Michael Shuster, CEO and Chief Architect of Ferroque Systems, Todd Shu, President of Ferroque Systems, and myself, Amber. Hi everyone, I look after the marketing here. Patrick Coble, a security nerd at heart, has been working in IT for 25 plus years. Patrick has been awarded the Citrix, CTP, and VMware EUC V-Expert designations resulting from his in-depth experience in security, VDI solutions, and his technical community support, including speaking engagements globally. He founded VDISEC, a veteran-owned consultancy firm focusing on information security and end-user computing. Welcome, Patrick. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Michael Shuster is the CEO of Ferroque Systems and a highly recognized Citrix consulting partner in North America. Serving the role as an architect, Michael has sat on Citrix's consulting team for over half a decade and has led many of Citrix's most significant consulting engagements. He regularly contributes to Citrix's leading practices and documentation. Good morning, Michael. Great to have you here as well.
Thank you.
And Todd Shu is the president of Ferroque Systems. His previous consulting company, TH Consulting, was acquired by Citrix in 2012, and he became the director of Citrix Consulting Services Canada. Todd joined Ferroque in 2020, and the company is now one of only 2 Platinum Plus partners in Canada. Welcome, Todd. Digital workspaces and
remote access. How are you guys doing?
Oh.
Sorry.
That's all good. All good.
Yeah.
Digital workspaces and remote access solutions are convenient but vulnerable to hackers, making security hardening crucial for any organization's cybersecurity strategy. Failure to implement adequate measures can result in data breaches, loss of sensitive information, and damage to a company's reputation. In today's digital age, businesses increasingly rely on remote access solutions and digital workspaces to enable their employees to work remotely or access company resources from anywhere. However, these digital workspaces and remote access solutions are also vulnerable to hackers, making security hardening a critical component of any organization's cybersecurity strategy. Digital workspaces mitigate many attack vectors associated with remote access, but nonetheless, several risks remain that need to be managed. And any computer system which users log directly into has inherent risks from intentional or unintentional user actions. Failure to implement adequate security hardening measures can lead to disastrous consequences such as data breaches, loss of sensitive information, and damage to a company's reputation. Moreover, hackers are continually developing new techniques to bypass security measures, making it necessary for businesses to stay updated on the latest security trends and best practices. In today's webinar, we'll discuss the security state of the union, look at some recurring findings and recommendations, as well as identify the #1 modern threat and how you can mitigate it. We'll go over the post-mortem of 3 very public ransom attacks and close out with 3 takeaways. We'll finish up with a roundtable discussion. So if you have any questions along the way, please add them to the chat and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. I'm going to hand things over to Michael and Patrick. You guys can take it away.
Thank you, Amber. Patrick, State of the Union here as far as our security posture and status on things. You want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, I think the main thing of this as we advance the slide is, ransomware is up, right? Everybody's making lots of money doing it and lots of people are losing money. Vulnerabilities are up. The number of CVEs that are found every year is growing exponentially, not just in a nice linear path, so it's going year over year up. And then data exfiltration. So if they don't get you with ransomware, they'll get you with data exfiltration. And based on Amber's talk before about company reputation, that's the one you really can't take back, right? The genie can't go back in the bottle if all your patient records or customer data or credit cards or whatever ends up on the interwebs, it's kind of game over. And so, and that even goes to the personal side. Identity theft is up, right? There's a lot of money to be made there through data exfiltration or ransomware or a combination of both. So we're definitely against a big multi-billion-dollar industry. And a lot of the things that we find at one client are always always at the other client. And so same story, different client is a very common story with us. And that's because the vulnerabilities from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago in many organizations still aren't fixed. They're not hardened and they're not been resolved. And the abundance of network operating systems, the explosion of work from home, especially during COVID, only compounded this problem. And it's definitely, we're in the tech revolution where our whole world is on the internet or on a digital system, and those digital systems are most likely vulnerable. So it's spicy out there, so be careful.
All right, so we're going to start talking about some recurring themes, some recurring findings here. We're going to start off talking a little bit about identity. I'm going to hand that over to Patrick for that. And then we're going to talk about just some OS network and app findings that we continue to have. So on the identity side, Patrick, how about you walk us through some of the most common things that we're continuing to see even in 2023? All right, so surprisingly, we are still running into customers when we're doing our digital workspace security assessments that don't have multi-factor authentication enabled on all their web assets, whether that's the ingress portal into the platform externally or from extranet networks. Just completed an assessment with a major bank the other week that their extranet from their third-party vendors weren't even using multi-factor and authentication getting into their environment as well. So it's still a major thing, and it's one of the easier things to actually fix, but although it's certainly been less of a trend of seeing this and it's reduced over the last few years, we still see it more often than we should, so it's a bit surprising. The second one up is Active Directory. So Active Directory is, again, many of the organizations around the world, small and large, have AD at the center of their identity and access management platform. It's their directory, their directory standard, as much as everyone wants to move off it. That is a very, very long process for a lot of organizations, and sometimes actually outright impossible in the near term or the midterm. So a lot of these organizations that have Active Directory deployments that have been evolving and existing over the past several decades, a lot of them have fundamental issues that have never been fixed in their security posture that continue to be exploited. And Patrick's going to talk about that a little bit further and how to mitigate against that. And then no dedicated privileged accounts, right? So we see this more often than not in smaller organizations, but we still come across instances, and that creates a lot of openings for ransomware to take hold, and we'll talk about that a bit later, where you got folks with privileged accounts or whatnot that also have either the local admin on their systems or whatnot, and they're also able to, on that same device, be checking email, browsing the web, which is where 90% or more of threats actually come into a computer with. So those are the three top things that we're seeing.
Michael talked about those identity related to Active Directory of MFA, no dedicated privileged accounts. And now when we talk about the recommendations of what you've got to do in Active Directory, you've got to change how you sign things. There are a couple recommended best practices, and if you've been paying attention to a CVE that happened last year, this will come into play of LDAP signing and NTLM versions.
But yeah, so these settings here is Landman is the original setting when Active Directory was deployed back in the late 90s, and all its goodness, which you can crack by pasting it into Google. So not very secure. NTLM is similar. It's not very strong, and NTLM v2 takes a lot to break through. So if you tell your domain controllers or your computers, your member servers to only authenticate at a certain level, there's obviously big benefits to that. And so picking that authentication level and then picking that LDAP signing is the most important thing you can do related to authentication to make sure credentials are being shared as secure between your domain controller and whatever device the user's on. So that's the big one. And then when you go to that next slide, that one's all about the hardening of what you'd recommend so that Bloodhound can't work. And so Bloodhound is a tool that as a penetration tester and security auditor you run. It's also something that bad guys run too. And what the goal is to use the weaknesses that have been built into the operating system since the late 80s, where everybody was on a work group and a domain kind of barely didn't exist. And so what you're able to do on any Windows domain system or connected to a Windows network, you can say, who am I? who's logged on, and then what groups are they in, right? Every file share, every device, all that. And so these basically 6 settings limit that ability and remove anonymous enumeration of those. So that means if I have a non-Windows thing on your computer, like a land turtle or some other implant or malware on a system, I can't run some of the same scripts that I could run from a non-privileged user to get privileged access. The goal of Bloodhound is to sniff out that privileged access. So if I log on to your VDI system and I run Bloodhound from it, it's going to say, hey, on this computer, a domain admin named George has logged in. Oh, cool. Well, the good thing about that is in the attacker world and Windows world is, you know how you can log into a domain and you don't have to have it connected to the network after you've logged in once? Well, that's exactly how this attack works. And this is how pass the hash works, is half your movie ticket is on every single system you log on to, right? And so this will help them find the movie tickets that are worth seeing, right? It's going after the Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and not just the random other flicks that are out there, right? And so these settings will limit that access for that. Now, what can happen to some systems on the LDAP signing side and the NTLM is if you have non-Windows file shares, there could be some bumps in the road there that can be experienced where they don't use NTLM v2. They won't let you restrict SAM accounts and enumeration from their file shares based on their Samba settings. So you've got to test these things out. This isn't like a Friday, click all these things that we've listed and you're going to magically be secure by Monday. You might have a bad weekend. So you got to test these things out before you do that. So that's what the whole pass the hash mitigations are. That's what these 6 settings do here.
So just along the same vein as the last item that I was talking about there, related to account rights or whatnot. So there's 2 areas for this. Number one, we see a lot of instances where VDI admins are also domain admins, and this is frankly terrible. You really ought to be putting in strategies where you've got different levels of administrative rights in an organization. If your VDI admins, because you're a smaller company, are also domain admins, great. You want completely separate accounts for that. They should not be one and the same. You're dripping gas when you're using core privileged AD accounts to log into anything, and especially when we're logging into things that other users log into, such as a workstation, a VDI, a multi-session system. The reason for this is pretty much the main genesis of these pass the hash attacks. And I can tell you personally, in my experience over the last few years, when we've been brought in to do post-mortem assessments on how a digital workspace environment got breached, in 2 of the 3 instances that we've been involved in, they came in through someone that was able to hijack credentials from a user that had logged in to the VDI. We're able to find a domain admin's credentials that had been logged in because the Citrix administrator was also domain admin, grabbed that hash, elevated the rights, and started moving laterally throughout the network and just wreaked havoc and introduced ransomware in both cases, which is what caused the outage, and then all this flurry of experts coming in to analyze the situation in order for insurance companies to be satisfied and whatnot and get their claims. So key thing number 1 here is making sure that we are blocking domain admins from logging into workstations VDAs. You can do this for various policies. The other ways of using like privileged account management platforms that change the passwords regularly on checkout, that can mitigate pass the hash issues as well. And if you aren't interested in something like that, but are looking at something, but don't want to just live off just blocking domain admins from being able to log into VDIs or whatnot, you can use something like Authlight, which is a very low-cost solution, and essentially only elevates your accounts into those domain admin groups once you've authenticated using multi-factor authentication or whatnot at the Windows GINA. So that token, if one gets created, is only going to be valid for that for a much more finite period of time in terms of its relevancy, because you're only part of those groups for a limited amount of time. When you log off, you're removed from the group or whatnot, and so on and so forth. So key thing here, VDI admins or domain admins, we need to get away from that. VDI users are local admins. That's another one we continue to struggle with, as I was mentioning there. Sometimes it's a necessary evil, but it's just one of those things where we really need to be mindful of how better to manage that. We're going to talk about some recommendations there in a second. On the subject of network, OS, and app findings that we continue to have. So starting off with the networking, this one, as we start to look in these things a bit deeper with customers, is a lack of firewalling, lack of segmentation, micro-segmentation of endpoints, servers, workstations, or what have you. And really, as IT specialists, the main thing that we have to remember that as much as IT is here to serve the users who serve the business and allow it to operate, users are our customer, but at the same time, they are pretty much our adversaries, because almost every piece of malware that comes in, again, 90% of these threats that we typically are dealing with on an ongoing basis are coming in through the internet. So we really need to treat the users and the network, the devices that they're logging into, whether that's workstations, whether those are VDIs, whether they're Citrix session hosts or any other type of RDS servers or whatever, anything a user's directly logging into and has a fairly good degree of access to move within that operating system as something that, well, I use the term biohazard later, but this is a risk because if we don't firewall these things off with proper rule sets, we're just opening things up a lot more for someone does get in that system, wants to start exploiting. They've got such an ability to start moving laterally into your digital crown jewel systems, your infrastructure networks, your app server networks, and start mining that data or just cryptoing everything. And on the OS and app side, when we say apps, this is not just about the apps running on the operating systems. This is also about whatever app is doing the delivery of your digital workspace, whether that's Citrix, VMware, or many of the others that are, or even Microsoft Stack or anything else that's out there nowadays. Number one thing that we're finding is customers continually to not apply security baselines for their operating systems. We find that in larger enterprise environments, FIs, large health orgs, this is typically actually done fairly well, but we're still finding gaps in those. But we're also seeing is instances in, let's say, the smaller customer sizes where the folks don't know any better. They're not doing any hardening at all. We also typically find no application control, i.e. anything can run anything on their computer, the internet, so we're not using any app control technologies that manages what can and cannot be installed or launched on that computer, which is critical just to minimize opportunity for certain pieces of software to get weaponized. Patrick's talked in other webinars about lol bins and things of that nature. So being able to restrict what users can access, hugely important. We actually have seen that with a lot of other companies that we've worked with who actually do a fairly good and hands-on security monitoring posture, where they know that just due to the nature of their circumstances, they're under attack quite frequently in the digital workspace environment, but they've taken steps to actually lock down certain tools or whatnot to limit their use, and then just watch how people are trying to use other tools getting in using active command line monitoring that's being reported back to the mothership syslog platform. Missing patches, work from home didn't help on this, but we find this quite often where just because folks are either organizations are understaffed or they don't know how to use the single image management technology or whatever, where I've walked across environments where the operating systems had not been updated in 4 years. The Citrix stack went out of support 5 years ago and has not been updated. Almost every single component was subject to CVEs. So we need to make sure that we're staying up to date on our cadence. It's one of the easiest things, up to date in having a cadence for doing our software and our app updates here, OS updates, because it's one of the simplest things to actually do to help mitigate a lot of these risks. No application portfolio. So we run into this more so in the larger orgs, but not actually having focal teams that are managing and being accountable for the product versions that are in the environment, monitoring their status, monitoring support renewal requirements, version CVEs or whatnot. And that's actually a really important part of lifecycle management of your applications, because it also ties into giving IT enough teeth to actually push back in the business saying, no, you need to actually upgrade your applications. We can't have you sitting on server 2008 or 2 anymore and running legacy versions of a digital workspace platform. You're introducing 5 different facets of risk here. We're shutting you down if you don't move this. So having a team like that has a bit of authority, as well as can be proactively monitoring for these types of things, critical. Another thing we see all the time still, again, it's reduced as security awareness has increased over the last 5+ years amongst the digital workspace community, but client redirection defaults, or instances where we think the client redirection defaults have been hardened to our org standards, yet we're finding gaps in terms of how they're being done. So whether this is RDS, VMware, Citrix, we're finding instances where client redirection is being left at default. So when you log in, my local drive is being redirected, my clipboard's being redirected, I can print. You've got data exfiltration risks. You've got opportunities for folks to introduce malware into the digital workspace environment. For our federal customers, they don't even allow clipboard redirection as all, which is kind of a pain because at least you want to be able to paste into the environment, you'd think. And the reason they don't even allow that is because there has been recorded instances, not at that government agency, but it's just a known thing where folks can actually start pasting in code to build malware within the environment and then starting to release that. So they don't even allow that, period. When we talk about, we assume they've been hardened, it's customers that have actually created policies in their environments to lock down client redirection, drive redirection, so on and so forth. But incidentally, they are actually scoping those policies to specific delivery groups or something. It's not a broad baseline that is applying, which would allow you to ensure that no matter what, there's a baseline security standard. Whenever anyone creates a new delivery group or something, they got to go edit the policy, they got to map the policy over to the thing. There's just too much opportunity for human error. You always want to have a baseline policy in your platform, your digital workspace platform, that is setting a default to no for these settings, and then only creating policies with higher precedence for those exceptions that require that security. It's a heck of a lot easier to manage and puts you in a better position. No backups or no offline backups. So it's very common, especially. So what's interesting about this whole advent of ransomware and how it's evolved over the years is how intelligent the software is getting, where it starts off actually trying to go in and attack and destroy backup software, backup capabilities, make the backups that you have access to completely irrecoverable. We've had instances with customers where they don't have backups at all. They say, oh, we got backups, and then you start in an assessment looking at those core systems. Are your master images backed up? Your main infrastructure servers, are they backed up? And as they start doing a one-for-one check, find out half of them aren't being backed up. And then beyond that, what's your strategy? Are your backups always connected to the network? A lot of customers over the last 10+ years have started moving away from tape backups. And tape backups are great because you literally had a copy that was not connected to the network, and you could rotate those. With the advent of virtual tape libraries and things like that, often we see these backups that are always attached to some sort of network, and they're still easily accessible. So it's something we want to keep in our vision here, because there is ransomware strategies that are actually attacking this stuff still, right? And trying intentionally to go after your backups so you cannot recover. You've got no choice but to pay them. Non-secure protocols. So we still see a lot of instances of using plain text LDAP. And LDAP over 389 is fine if you're using LDAP via TLS, because that's the protocol it uses. But LDAP-S or LDAP over TLS, really need to see that. Work with customers where they are not doing any encryption of their Citrix XML traffic still, which is important if you've got any NetScalers, customer managed NetScalers, a storefront in the mix, customers that aren't even encrypting their storefront traffic. And this is providing great opportunities for man-in-the-middle attacks, because although things like passwords may be passed through in a hash, that hash is not exactly particularly robust and can be, sometimes decoded with base64 and things like that. So you really want to be throwing a certificate on these things to fully encrypt them. Anything you want to add, Patrick, onto this one? Otherwise, I think we can bop over to the next one.
Yeah, we're ready to pop to the next one. I mean, that's good stuff. I mean, good/bad stuff, right?
Yeah. All right, identity hardening recommendations. I'll hand this one over to you.
All right, I'm waiting for the thing. Yeah, so the big thing here is Active Directory is still the cornerstone of authentication for most deployments, but now it's being front-ended by something using SAML or Azure AD, some other cloud service, ping one login, everybody in from there. So the one thing that we always recommend is making sure you understand externally more than anything is what requires MFA, what doesn't require MFA, right? What are the gaps? And then to that point is that conditional access. should anyone from anywhere be able to access anything, no matter what their device is or isn't? And that's where conditional access needs to be configured. To at least, to Michael's point too, is making sure you have a secure default, and then you can have relaxations from there, right? We know that there's going to be somebody that you're going to have to release the Kraken a little bit for them so that they can do their thing, but you shouldn't let it be for everybody, and it shouldn't be that default. And that user device posture awareness, Citrix has just released some of their device posture service, right? And that's a cool thing. And if anyone's heard of Device Trust or other companies along those lines, that whole goal is that, and even Citrix with endpoint analysis, like the old way, the EPA client, is that as I log in, my identity is hopefully verified beyond just a username and password, right? So it's username, password, plus a passcode, plus a push, plus something, one OTP, TOTP, whatever. Not SMS, hopefully. And then once I've authenticated, then I'm going to look at that device and go like, oh, that thing hadn't been patched. That's Windows Vista. Yeah, no, you can't access this. And so that's probably there. And I know, Michael, you probably got some good stuff from there too.
Yeah, I just want to add one key thing there as well. When we're talking about conditional access and SAML, one thing that I feel is very important, and not every organization does, or at least maybe they've done it once and never touched it again, is doing a risk assessment of their applications and data portfolio, and then identifying, what's our highest level of risks, where if this got exploited somehow, what's the degree of impact? Because that's really going to dictate the level of conditional access that you're going to apply. So if you're providing trusted access through digital workspace environment into your network, chances are you're probably going to want to put some more scrutinized conditions on that. Maybe you won't only want them accessed from managed or trusted devices, and there's many ways to do that. Maybe you only want them to be able to connect through trusted networks or whatnot. So if you're using a ZTNA or CASB platform of sorts, we'll talk about that a bit later too, they typically will give you an access or a range of IP addresses for those services that your users are connecting from. So whether you're connecting to your digital workspace platform, whether or not you're connecting from connecting to maybe other applications with very sensitive data in it. Maybe it's your Salesforce data, which may, or other systems, HR systems or whatnot, where there's a lot of PII or sensitive information in there. You can start crafting conditional access policy to say, great, not only do you need MFA, but we need you actually coming from a trusted network where we know we could only be on using our platform, our tenant of Zscaler or Netscope or Cato or Palo Alto Prisma, list goes on, to be able to access this platform. You're just adding further restrictions on who can actually get into these systems, including geolocation restrictions as well, right? There's all sorts of things you can do, but that conversation truly starts with understanding the risk level associated with all your different assets and data sets in your environment. All right, off my soapbox here, back over to addressing privileged account management.
Yep. Which, I mean, I think you made the perfect meme for that with SpongeBob and superpowers before this too, right? Because this ties back to that slide right on it. Is if you're a member of domain admins right now watching this, and you're checked your email and you did that with that account, you're doing it wrong, right? Domain admin, enterprise admin, all these default privileged groups should be empty. They should have administrator in there, and they should have a break the glass account, right? If everything goes belly up in some way, right? But then having dedicated accounts. So that way, the big thing here, and this is where a couple big hacks have happened at Uber, Sony, and a couple others, were privileged accounts, checking email, clicking the things, right? And so this is where we have a dedicated account that we only do nerdy things with the nerdy account and not with our account that we just check our email with. Like, so the P Coble account and the M Shuster are just to check things, not to fix things or do things, right? And then that's where I know me and Mike talked about this too, is some of the PAM systems. There's DIY, there's paid systems. And then the really cool way is the bottom one, where it's elevation just in time. So yeah, you still have a dedicated privileged account, but it's just a member of domain users. It can't do a hill of beans, right? But then when you tell it in the PAM system, like, hey, I need to install software on this system, boop, now it's in the local administrator group for there. I need to edit Active Directory because we're getting ready to finally phase out Exchange. Bloop, you're in schema admins, and then you're done, right? So you
And
probably
this also extends to just users that like are developers or whatnot that still need the ability to install software on their systems, but giving them broad domain admin access just isn't ideal. And UAC certainly had its use and still important, but it doesn't really cover all the bases, right? So things like Beyond Trust are very popular for managing elevated rights management. So only at a certain just-in-time access to start doing your app installs or whatnot. Rights are temporarily elevated, go back down again. Rights management, elevation management's now even something that's included in part in Citrix's Workspace Environment Management too. So there's a lot of different ways of addressing this. And as mentioned, from like an administrator standpoint, PAM systems, I've talked about Authlight which is great for elevated accounts where, again, just in time, you're only actually in that group when you've actually successfully authenticated, and once the session's done, those rights move down. So you're never actually in that domain admin group until you actually need to be. So these are great ways of just managing that risk there to an additional degree.
Yeah, and this is one of the most common findings. I've audited companies that were multi-billion-dollar companies with 10, 15,000 employees, 100,000 employees, and then they still have 500 people in domain admins, and it's because it's easy. Just put them in domain admins and it works, right? They have the rights to do things, and they only had 170 people in IT that should have been even close to that. Well, and who else was in there? Everybody in help desk, a couple random developers, a couple random vendors, a bunch of service accounts. That's who was in domain admins.
Youch. Yeah, and service accounts are a blind spot as well, right? I mean,
for sure.
Because you could create them. They oftentimes will need elevated rights. Not always. You always want to make sure you give them only the minimum rights they need. But they're those obscure things that are there. They usually have a non-expiring password. You set it, forget it, and then next thing you know, I mean, we saw this during some of the NetScaler CVEs back in 2019, where, oh, look, the LDAP account was also a member of the domain admins account, and then someone grabbed our ns.conf file, and now we had a not expiring admin account that we were able to reverse the credentials on and get into the networks. Like, it was just chaos, right? So,
and this is where, when best practices change, it makes it really hard. And so when people were thinking about like a bind account, right, just the simple service of bind, they thought, oh, this thing's got to have some juice. No, just domain user.
Yeah,
and then in some cases, not domain user is also optimal, right? To not have a correct primary account, because there are benefits security-wise to do that. But I've seen so many juiced up bind accounts for so many products, from VPN to VDI and everything, and application ABCD, that it's kind of bonkers. But when you don't know, you don't know, and that's part of it. But when also best practices change, it makes it very difficult to keep up, like in this privileged account management system. If you would have called Microsoft 10 years ago and said, hey, I've got a privileged account management problem, they'd say, give me $150,000 and I'll make you a red forest. We'll make a whole nother forest that only has privileged accounts in it. Everybody else will be in the other. That forest, that in that domain, will have the rights for privileged accounts, and there will be no privileged accounts in the other. If you Google Microsoft Red Forest now, it's not recommended by Microsoft.
Yeah, they deprecated that. But there's still a lot of good practices in that, though. I mean, I've seen customers that took a lot of the principles of Red Forest and implemented it in one domain, where you hear out your application systems, whether it's Citrix, infrastructure, whatever, and tier it based on criticality. And then let's say there's 3 tiers, and each of those tiers has completely different service accounts to access those systems, and group policy on all the systems that are enforcing what groups can and cannot log in. So if you're admin of tier 2, you can log in and do your tier 2 stuff, but you can't log into tier 1 stuff with that same account. You can log into tier 1 stuff. If you've got a tier 1 account, you log in with that, get your tier 1 stuff in there, do your work on those systems, that's it. And you're managing that control and managing your risk. You're pretty much just adding a blast radius and a admin boundary to what you can do with those accounts, which were some of the principles of Red Forest in a way. So you are getting some of the benefit. Right. I mean, even in some of the organizations we work with, we've advocated for that type of process, just to add multiple levels of security access to control, again, the lateral movement of one account over the other. And really, even like let's say the SA0 account, that's only used for maybe domain admin management, and that is it. And you can only log on and use that account from certain systems, and that's all from a security perspective, just because they are so sensitive and have so much power, trying to restrict how that can be used as much as possible.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to OS and app recommendations. So first things first, security baseline policies. So Microsoft's got standard sets of security baseline policies that can be applied to environments. There's also a number of security baseline recommendations from a lot of leading security experts out there as well that can be useful. Patrick has authored a fantastic OS hardening article on Citrix Tech Zone that's worth a look, that came out in the last month or so, but it's very comprehensive there, very much worth a read. App Locker, so even built-in technologies like App Locker and App Control or whatnot with Microsoft, those are, although there's other solutions out there that exist, this is a useful piece of software that will allow you to start locking down what can and cannot be launched in the environment. And it can be a bit tedious, and there's a bit of a learning curve to get that going, so forewarned. But if you actually do implement it, you bring a lot of value to restricting what can and can't be run. And this also extends to making sure that, you know, from a policy perspective, we're locking down access to PowerShell and Command and all these other things as much as we possibly can. Hardening Office is another one. We kind of see this when it's actually done to be kind of half-baked. I haven't seen anyone actually do it comprehensively, but simple things like restricting, you know, the use of VBAs and macro or whatnot in the Office suite, disallowing anything but the official corporate email account to be added to Outlook, things like that, so people aren't able to add their own personal mail, and inadvertently introducing, you know, the opportunity for malware to come through when they're clicking on something, yada yada yada. Hardening Office, and just to restrict any gaps, that sort of close out any gaps from a security standpoint, there is also important. Remaining current on OS and your app and your Citrix patches or whatnot, again, duh, but it still doesn't get done consistently. We talked about restricting the client redirection defaults a little bit earlier. Application management teams that have some authority, talked about that too. EDR, next-gen anti-malware. So I don't come up against it as much as I used to, but I've still come across the odd environment of the last few years that doesn't have any AV software on it at all, because somehow someone told them that, oh, it's a digital workspace platform, you don't need AV, which is the exact opposite.
It's read-only.
Absolutely.
Read-only, no big deal. Yeah, it can just execute and annihilate your environment, but it's read-only, so no big deal.
Yeah. So there's next-gen anti-malware is kind of in the trend, EDR products or whatnot. I mean, like, for almost every major AV vendor now is coming out with some sort of EDR platform of sorts that's doing more an AI-powered analysis or whatnot, and you know, Huntress and all these other great technologies out there. Really be looking at that because those are key as well, just to make sure that we're recovering from a. I mean, when we start talking a bit later about ZTNA and things like that, because it plays nicely with EUC environments. The one thing we got to bear in mind is that those platforms can help stop malware while it's in transit before it actually hits your endpoint. It's your malware, it's your anti-malware, your antivirus software on the endpoint that's actually going to help stop once it actually gets on there. Backups, that goes without saying. A, make sure you got them. B, do some restore tests periodically so you know you can actually restore that. It's amazing how many people don't do that, and then when they actually need to restore it, they're SOL. Make sure you've got some offline copies. And I also want to bring up Citrix Security Analytics, just because, again, Citrix is one of the more prominent platforms out there for digital workspaces. Security Analytics is a really interesting tool, and it brings in data points from a number of different areas, including like your IDPs or whatnot, and it uses machine learning and AI to start identifying patterns with users and start generating alerts based on anomalous behaviors. And that can be just unlikely travel or logging in from new devices or new countries, new IPs, whatever, lots of data moving, all sorts of things. And it's fairly extensible in terms of what you want to do. So you can actually get alerts and then actually create actions for those alerts. Do I want to lock the user out? Do I want to log the other session off? Do I want to turn on session recording? Do I want to send them an email that they have to notify and acknowledge that this was actually them or something happens? You can craft these sorts of things as well. And even from outside of a security standpoint, that type of technology alone was able to uncover some blind spots that an FI that we were working with had, where as soon as we turned it off, they were required that they're like, just from that industry governance, they were not allowed to transact and be doing business outside of their given country. And when they turned this feature on, they found that a significant portion of their team, this is also the pandemic, were actually working outside of the country they were allowed to be in. That put the organization at risk. So yeah, key thing there, just to bear that in mind. All right, so moving over here, network hardening recommendations. So number one, treat VDI and multi-session hosts as you would workstations, as biohazards. You really need to treat them with care. Need to assume that they're going to be problematic because they're ingress points that users can introduce, click on links on the internet, this, that, and the other thing. Access email. They can do things that, despite all the training that you want to give users on cybersecurity training, you're still going to run into instances of users that still make poor choices. And we need to be mindful of that. And there's also instances that because this is, or the fact that because this is an ingress point to the network, and your quote unquote trusted networks here getting on the inside, once someone's in, you really want to make sure that if there was a bad actor that got in, whether it's an insider threat with a user that's acting maliciously intentionally, or someone that's hijacked that session or their credentials and got in, you want to be able to minimize the damage they can do immediately. You don't want to make it easy for them and have a flat network. So firewall these things off so it's harder for them to start moving around. Securing communication paths properly. So we talked about securing, simple things like LDAP and XML traffic if you're using Citrix, websites and what have you. Device firmware updates and NetScaler hardening. NetScaler hardening, we could do an entire webinar on that. I think Patrick's actually done one before, and it's phenomenal. A lot of good stuff in there. And there's only new features that have actually come up to be talking about in that type of thing. So we probably should almost do one at some point. But device firmware isn't just about NetScalers. That is about anything else that's attached to a digital workspace environment that could be exploited, right? Many of the firewall vendors over the last number of years have had vulnerabilities show up in their own code. And if some of those exploits are actually taken advantage of, well, boom, now you're in a device that's connected to all these different, forget the firewall, because you've got routes into all these different networks that you can start going nuts in. So making sure that your device firmware is up to date on your network, critical as well. All right, moving forward. And we're going to start talking about modern threats. And for this, I'm going to hand this over to Patrick again to walk us through this, because this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have right here.
Yep. Yeah. And Labyrinth with David Bowie is perfect, because this is definitely a maze for most people to navigate, and it's not easy. Incomplete and missing logging is one of the most common findings of any security audit of anything, whether you're auditing VDI or Active Directory or just your whole deployment. And the big thing there is that, best practices have changed. It costs a lot of money depending on the logs and what you log and do everything from there. But everyone has missing log sources. And that comes from event sources from your operating systems, network net flow type of things like extra hop and other things, your command, as in your privileged accounts, everything else, and then data logging, like who's accessing file server X and file 33. I don't know. I mean, the share's set to everyone full control. Sorry. But those types of things happen. And so if you don't have good event logging, you will not catch the execution of malware, the very initial execution, and then you won't catch the exfiltration of data, because especially if you don't have network flow data, or at least firewall flow data that's at least smart, you won't see that 37 gigabytes has just been uploaded to a random pastebin server. That's weird. I don't think anyone should be pasting something that's 37 gigs. Well, that's your whole customer database that just ended up on the internet. Thanks a lot. So if you don't have that type of logging, you'll never know that happened. And so you've got to actually monitor that data. And the way I always talk about it is making sure you've got your firewall situated first, because that's where traffic should be going in and out, and you'll have some basic logging of this IP, talk to that IP over this port. And then from there, moving into Active Directory, and then identity, and then your databases, and then your file shares. And then the most important thing is your C-suite, your leadership, your IT team, your finance team. Who can send an email that says, hey, wire the money to this account? You want 100% logging on that device. You don't want to forget about that random one at Susie's office or at her home in her jammies. You need to know people that have access to money in every company you work for. You need to know what's going on in those systems. And so it means that you will pay a good chunk of money for depending on what SIM you pick and how you configure it and give it hugs and kisses, because it's a long-term relationship, just like most IT products. You don't just next it like a Ronco food dehydrator, set it and forget it. You've got to remember it on a regular basis. You've got to go patch it. You got to look at the logs. You got to tune it. You got to tweak it for your environment. So it's definitely a maze to figure out logging. It would be easy to just say log everything. Most people can never afford that, and especially in large organizations. So you've got to monitor these types of things, or you're going to get caught in a bad situation.
And second to logging, it's just actually making sure that people are looking at the data. I mean, otherwise, if you're not looking at the data proactively real time and real time, all you've got when you actually have a breach is understanding how screwed you actually are versus going, hey, we're actually getting attacked here. There's something anomalous going on. We need to take action, start looking at it. And again, so from a digital workspace perspective, large healthcare training university in the US that I work with, they, again, like I mentioned earlier, they've got these risks and they know they're getting attacked all the time. So they put in mitigations for this, but their SOC is so on point on things that they always correlate different data sources coming from a bunch of different areas in real time, including commands that are getting entered at, PowerShell with command prompt or whatnot, so they can see what's going on. So very quickly, when something anomalous is happening on a VDI or what have you, they can lock down, isolate that thing, stop it in its tracks, and minimize what's actually going on. They may not fully mitigate every single bit of data that could be exfiltrated from the environment, but they sure as heck have been able to actually stop it where it is and reduce the impact of what could actually be going on. So actually monitoring what's happening is important. And oftentimes we'll run into customers that, yeah, we've got monitoring everywhere, but no one's actually making sure that that's actually watching the stuff on a regular basis, which is where if you don't have a capable SOC in the budget for it, looking at like an MSSP is useful in that regards. So it becomes someone else's responsibility. You've outsourced it to be continually looking at that data and those sources, and they will alert you when there's action that needs to be taken, or they take it themselves if they've got the rights to do so.
That's right.
All right, moving forward. All right, web security, or otherwise known as edge security. So this is another thing that's come up. And here's the thing, this isn't anything new, but it's just becoming more prevalent, and the technologies that we can start using that, a bit of evolved from like the old school web filters or whatnot have just come up. And this is because it's evolved, especially because of the multi-location work from anywhere strategies that we all have now that just got one up during the pandemic. But again, I said it before, 90% of all cyber attacks originate via web and email or whatnot in some way, shape, or form. A lot of the more advanced attacks may take different vectors, but this is low-hanging fruit here. And using web security and email filtering are crucial. These are your spam filters. These are your whatever web security, which is now built into so many different products, whether it's your next-gen firewalls that are able to do these types of things, or whether it's SASE, CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers, which is sort of like a cloud control plane version of like your next-gen firewalls for edge security in a way, Zero Trust Network Access Solutions. A lot of these products have a CASB-like technology built in that can start, and it's not just about controlling what websites people can and can't go to based on categories, it's also actually configuring what users can and cannot do in certain applications. If you're on a work device, maybe you do want to, just for employee retention, allow them to access Facebook, but you don't want them posting anything, taking those controls. And the other thing too as well in here is we'll find that folks will take a CASB solution, for example, and just deploy it and they set it and forget it. They don't actually decrypt the traffic on the website. So although you've got some level of security here, you haven't actually blocked, and you're not able to actually scan within that secure traffic path for malware and things like that, or DLP and what have you, if you've got that configured, to stop it in its tracks. So actually doing the work to properly roll out decryption as part of those solutions is critical. Obviously, there's going to be trusted websites. For example, don't try and use a ZTNA solution or whatnot on your Citrix HDX traffic. It's going to blow up, things like that. There's going to be certain app service, SaaS services that you're going to trust and leave be, and they don't really pose a risk for data movement really. But certainly, if you're accessing other websites where there's you're interfacing with sensitive data or have the ability to transmit sensitive data, yeah, something you want to bear in mind and ensure that we've got these decryption pieces in place. DNS plays a key role, and that's something I wanted to bring up as well. So relying on just whatever conventional DNS is provided to us can be a bit of a problem. DNS, a lot of DNS solutions that are out there don't necessarily have a lot of hygiene built in to actually start blocking DNS requests going to known bad servers and bad websites and what have you. So even like if you're a home user, Quad 9 and things like that, which is a free service, has a lot of DNS security built in. And a lot of the ZTNA platforms that are used today, or SASE platforms, they usually have their own DNS security built in. But it's a very easy thing to use and configure if you just at least to think about is DNS security. Cisco had like there's Cisco Umbrella, I think, has a piece in there as well. But there's a lot of different technologies for this. Other thing here, modern threat wise, is I know it's obnoxious. People have to do it every year. Is that user education training? That's cybersecurity awareness training, web, email, social engineering awareness in terms of how to be working securely on your endpoints and things to watch out for. And it's important to do these every year and just not blindly click through, because this usually ESET and these other companies update it every year, because the landscape changes, the attack vectors are changes. People are always changing how they're trying to actually get people to do bad things or do stupid things, right? So it is a really, really critical piece here, just from a prevention standpoint. It does help. Enterprise browsers, this is something that we've been talking about for a couple of years now. Now there's the advent of like burner container VDIs, and these just provide a way to say, great, you know what, inside the corporate network, no internet access whatsoever. Everything's blocked. If you need to go out to the internet, you're using a browser that's running a container someplace outside of the network, or in some place that has no direct connectivity to our network. Anything on our network that's showing any of this is just a presentation protocol, and that's it. And there you go, you're off. And burner container VDIs are something as well that have been coming up that provide a similar function, that really air gap access to the internet versus what's actually happening on your local computer that's internal to the network, your VDI that's in the trusted network, to add an additional layer of security. You have anything to add on that one there, Patrick, or we can flip over to some of those case study pieces?
No, yeah, let's flip over to the case studies. I mean, I think you nailed it. There's lots of options. If this was all on your security bat belt, our pants would be on the ground. It'd be too heavy. Could not hold it up. There's so many tools and things. So yeah, so this one's talking about some of these big attacks. So Colonial Pipeline, if anyone remembers this hack, this rose the price of gas in the United States over $1 in a week. And especially depending regionally where you were, because it ran kind of southwest to northeast. So if you were in the path of that, they couldn't move the millions of gallons. And so this is where those attacks have real world impacts, and not just like, their company's reputation, right? And then there's another attack at JBS meat packaging as the next one there. And this they actually had to pay the hackers, because in that situation they deleted the backups, right? So there was nothing. So they would have been completely nuked, gone. And one of the things to note is, even with these two, there's so many successful ransomware attacks from large companies that you never hear about because they don't disclose, right? So this is only just the tip of the iceberg, and below it, it's a hot mess, right? So this rose the price of pork and beef products across the United States, almost doubled the per pound cost when this went down. And that's because meat is only good for so long, if you don't know. So if you don't cut it, slice it, dice it, get it out to the store, sell it, eat it, cook it, whatever, it's all gone. So it's a perishable market. So it's a big impact there. And then probably the scariest, which is gonna happen there, is Oldsmore, Florida. This is where a disgruntled employee used a remote PC to access a dosing system, and they cranked up the amount of chlorination, basically, to clean the water to a poisonous, deadly level that if you drink the water in the course of a couple of days, you would die. And this happened, and the only reason it wasn't successful and people didn't die is because it was done at like 3:50 on a Friday afternoon. If that person would have logged in at 4:30, 4:15, that person that was watching the computer, that saw their mouse moving and going, why are they, what's changing the dosing? They wouldn't have caught it. So the good thing is like some of them, the dosing station is at one pump house, and the final filtration and going back to your pipes was at another place with one more set of sensors and one more set of alarms. So it alarmed from there. So the bad water was in the pipes heading to someone's house, but they were able to backwash it and suck it back out and do all that. But the tail of this is this is power grid, water, these types of things. There are over 20,000 water treatment plants like that in the United States and Canada. And so that is not sometimes controlled by the government, not controlled by the state, federally mandated, anything like that. It might be a public-private partnership, some for-profit company. So they're all just ready and ripe to be attacked. And so bad things are going to happen to our supply chains. And here we're talking about food, fuel, and water that you drink. Three, key ingredients to most people's lives. And a bad attack happens, you're going to know. So we're ready. I think we're ready for this last ones.
Yeah. All right. Key takeaways. Default, number one, first of all, get it out of the way. Defaults with your products are insecure. Product defaults are usually insecure intentionally just so it's got the widest case of adoption and use when the product's deployed. I really wish that ideology would change because it would save us a lot of grief, but defaults are insecure. It's one of the first things you want to do, whether it's passwords on devices or redirection policies in your delivery software like Citrix or VM or whatever. Defaults are insecure. You're going to want to go change those. Next up, knowing who's who and what's what. Patrick, got any words on that?
Yeah, this is most common finding. I pull an Active Directory report and I say, hey, look at these 6,000 systems that haven't logged on. And this was one that I did literally yesterday. And they're like, oh, we deleted those. No, you didn't. So if you've got 6,000 active Directory accounts that are disabled or enabled and you aren't monitoring those, it only takes a flip of a switch to turn those back on, and you would never notice. It's a needle in a haystack with lots of needles and more hay, right? So it just disappears into the matrix. So the identity part, and then what is this system doing? Oh, that's our prox card reader system. Oh, that's our web server. That's this application. Why is there a server 2003 still on our network? Oh, I don't know. So what is ID and device management is key. Lifecycle management, we already talked about that, right? Yeah. And then the real is what we just talked about in the previous slide, and frequent is what we're always talking about because it keeps happening. Ransomware's up, data exfiltration's up, identity theft is up. There's too much money to be made for it to not be a fun time.
Yeah. So the main message here, because I know not everything we've talked about has been directly on the subject of digital workspace, but security hardening of your infrastructure and your digital workspace starts with the overall security posture and your strategy for your entire network. The digital workspace is just a piece of it. It's just one of the more critical ingress points that gives access to sensitive information within your network. So critical piece, but at the end of the day, it's just one piece of the puzzle. So a lot of these recommendations are broad in their scope. And with that, I'll hand it over to Amber and Todd to close us out.
Awesome. Well, that was an amazing discussion. Definitely lots of things were discussed today and lots of great insights and recommendations. I want to just throw out there that if anyone listening does want help or does want to take a look at their network, we're happy to do a discovery call with you. So please make sure that you reach out to us. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. Thank you for helping to prepare this information that we could share with everyone. So it was great to have you on the webinar today.
Thank you. It was great. It was fun times.
Awesome. And as well, always, thank you, Michael. You always have lots of great insights and things to share with us.
What I do. Thank you. And thanks you all for joining us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
We'll talk to you guys later. Have a great day.
Later, Gators. Bye-bye.
Take care, Patrick.
I don't think I've ever laughed so much on a webinar as this one, with all Patrick's funny sounds and jokes and everything. So
yeah, that's usually for me, the privacy training is my favorite thing to do as one of the services I do, and that's why people like it so much. is because I have fun, and it's not just Bueller, 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 Bueller. Don't click on that, Bueller, Bueller, right? So we put funny memes in it. We talk in a funny way so that people go, oh man,
Huh?
yeah, I'm not clicking that email. No, that's not, there. So yeah, it's fun.
Have a
All
good
right.
day, guys. Bye.
Have a great one. Thank you. Bye bye.